Kate's also doing her first marathon in May, by the way, Pittsburgh Marathon. So cool. Well, good morning. We're good to see everybody here. We are doing a series called Confessions of Your Lead Pastor, but I tell you what, the church is so much more than just me, even the staff, the team. We have an incredible staff. It's an honor to be a part of it. With Todd and Lauren, Kate, and so many other people who just give so much of their time and effort into building what God is doing here at Discovery, and that includes all of you as well. So my first confession of today is this. I confess to you that I am ready for this series to be done. I am ready. I've never looked more forward to a series being done than this one. In all of my messages, I'll tell you, I try to peel back the curtain a little bit to my life so that you can know that I am not someone who's on another spiritual level or anything like that from you, that I am just like you, someone who is trying to follow Jesus in this life. And sometimes it's really hard when others are not going that direction. And so I want you to know that about me. But that does mean that next week we will be starting a new series. And I'm excited about this series, really excited about it. It's called Choose Your Fighter. I don't know if you're a video gamer, or I am still a little bit, not as much as I used to be, but I used to love games like Street Fighter, like Street Fighter 2, that was probably my wheelhouse, and or Super Smash Brothers, where I love the screen where you get to choose your fighter, because they're all different. And I always played Street Fighter, just so you know, I always played Ken. Ken, I got all his moves down, even though his same moves as like the guy Ryu, but Ken looked more like me, so I played Ken and got really good at him. But in this series, we're talking about individuals in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, who all encountered Jesus, who squared off with Jesus. And we're going to look at their encounters and how they never were the same after meeting Jesus. After going toe-to-toe with Jesus, they always were different. And we're going to look at people like the woman at the well. We're going to start with her next week in John chapter 4. We're going to look at the man with 6,000 demons. We're going to talk about Mary of Bethany, Pontius Pilate, Peter, Judas, and even Satan. And we will see that all of us have to decide in this life what we're going to do with Jesus. And this is a series that's going to take us all the way through Easter. All right, the series is going to end on Easter Sunday. And I want you to know that every one of these messages on this series, starting next week all the way through Easter, is specifically designed not just for you, but also for your what? For your one. For someone in your life who maybe doesn't go to church anywhere, who doesn't really know what following Jesus means, these messages, this series is going to be designed for them as well. We want every single person to kind of get in an encounter with Jesus. All right, and that's what this series is all about. Now, as we wrap up our confession series, there are several things as I was writing these past messages that I just kind of kept a little note file going about all these different things I wanted to talk about, but they never really fit into any of the past messages. So I just decided, hey, how about for the last week of this series, I'll just take those things in that note file and throw them into one message. So that's kind of what today is. I titled this message today, I just got to get this off my chest, right, and just get it out there. So it's going to be a little all over the place today, but the first confession that I have for you today is that I confess that people who have developed a backyard mentality make me sad. And what I mean by that is because I used to have a backyard mentality. I grew up in a really small town in Indiana, and I would hear about things on the news, or at school, things that took place in other parts of the world. But if it didn't affect me personally in my little small town and my backyard, then it didn't really matter. I felt like it was I didn't care. And it wasn't until I grew up and began to travel around the world to places like Europe and Asia and Central and South America, Middle East, that I realized how big the world really is and all the people who make up our world that God has created and loves, and my small part to play in all of it. And I remember reading this quote by American classic author Mark Twain. I love this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I believe it's 50% accurate. He says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. That broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And if I had the resources, I would love to take every single one of you and put you on a plane and go on an international mission trip. I'd love to do that. Because sometimes when we do go out of the country or we go to places like Mexico or go somewhere in the Caribbean, what do? We stay in like the all-inclusive, right, touristy areas where you're in the country, yes, but you're not seeing the real life country people experience. And this is why I think Mark Twain is only half right. Because I think we need to travel to these places, and then we need to learn from the people there. And notice I didn't say serve the people there. Because sometimes when we think about an international mission trip, that's the goal, right? We go there to serve people. And I remember going on a mission trip when I was in like college and a young adult, and thinking that's what international mission trips are all about, that we go to these other places as people who have it all together, that we're going to these places and telling them, you need to be like us, and here's how you do it. Instead, I realized, as you spend time with people in other nations, you begin to learn things about your life that you're like, oh, I am totally not getting that. I'm learning from them how God wants me to live in my life here. And so it's kind of this mutual beneficial experience that we're learning from each other together. And I want you to know that as a Discovery Church, there's a lot of new people here at Discovery over the past several, especially the last year. And so maybe you don't even know about this, so I want to make sure that you do. That you're caught up to this, but we partner with 3 incredible organizations. One of them is called Mission to El Salvador. And this is an old picture, by the way. I grabbed it off of their social media. I couldn't find a real recent one, but this is Danielle and John Snyder and their kids. And Tori is like in college right now. And it's a very old picture. But if you don't know Danielle and John, they're incredible people. They used to be where you are right now, sitting at Discovery Church and a part of the church services and things like that. And about 10 years ago, they were on a mission trip to El Salvador. And God grabbed their heart for the people there. And they had great jobs here. They had little kids back then. And they sold their house. They quit their jobs and moved to San Salvador to start Mission to El Salvador. And a few years ago, I got a chance to go and see their projects, see their work that they're doing down there. Incredible stuff. We send mission trips there often to go support them. But they help people who are experiencing deep poverty, addiction to drugs, victims of human trafficking. Just really hard things that they are right in the midst of. And I want you to know that our next mission trip is going to be next year, 2025, to go. So I know that sounds like a long time away, but it's not. It'll be here before you know it, and we're going to start having some informational meetings about that trip in 2025 so that you can kind of come hear about the trip and how you might be a good part of that. So we'd love for you to be thinking about that, praying about that. And we're also, another partner of ours is called Stadia Church Planting. Stadia is awesome because they share our values here at Discovery. There are the value for reaching lost people. And one of the most effective ways of reaching the lost is starting new, Jesus-loving, Bible-teaching churches in areas where they are. And Stadia is one of the best at it. And they also share our value of the next generation. Their mantra is, we won't stop until every child has a church. One of our values is investing in the next generation. And Stadia has planted over thousands of churches and have a 90% success rate. And just this past week, they started brand new churches in Atlanta, and Houston, and Milwaukee, and India. That's a country that they are very focused in right now, and it's very hostile towards Christians, but hundreds of churches in India are being started almost every year, and Stadia is a big part of that. As we're talking about church planting, there's also a couple that we helped partner with, Tanner and Delaney Salva, as part of Mustard Seed. They are planting a church in Japan, specifically the city of Sapporo. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's up in the northernmost island of Japan where there are very few churches and 2 million people in that city. Tanner grew up going to Discovery and graduated from Seneca Valley. So maybe some of you are in school there right now, even, and your kids are, but that's Tanner and Delaney. We help partner with them as well. And we want you to know our ministry partners. As a matter of fact, our mission trip who went this past summer, they came back from Mission El Salvador just like, man, we got to let people know. We have so many new people in our church. I'm like, you're right. And so we're actually turning one of our walls in our lobby into kind of our ministry partner hub so that you can see and guests who come into our building can see who we're partnering with and the great work that God is doing through them. And we want you to know this as well, because whenever you give to God through Discovery, whether you give through our giving boxes or the plates that pass, or you give online like most of us do, every time that you give to God through Discovery, you are also giving to those ministry partners. That every offering that we take, a portion of that goes to these ministry partners. So as our offering continues to grow, so does our commitment to ministry partners like this. It's kind of like the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so speaking of our generosity, I want to give you one quick update. We send out every week, I hope you get this. If you don't, I'm going to tell you how you can. A weekly update so that you can stay in tune to everything that's going on at Discovery. So we want you to make sure that you are getting that. If you don't, you maybe need to check your junk email, or you need to make sure you have the correct email that you've given us. But I wanted to show you that in the weekly update, there's a chart that we send out so that you can see where we're at with our generosity. And I want you to notice in the second line, it's our weekly need. And that number, that 27,885, here's how we got that. We as a church committed in our Immeasurably More initiative in November last year, $1,450,000. Divide that by 52, you get that weekly need. And last year, our weekly need was 20,000 on the dot. So it's more than it was because of that commitments that all of us have made. Those of us who are part of Discovery, call the church our home. But I also want to show you that in this past weekly update, on the first line, last offering, there was a special $150,000 gift given. That doesn't happen often, by the way, in case you know that. I've been here for 6 years. That's never happened before. But I want you to see why. First of all, I want you to celebrate that. That's incredible. That's awesome, right? Excellent, right? That's cool stuff. But I want you to know, first of all, that skews the numbers a little bit. And that is a couple who made a commitment last year, part of the Immeasurably More, that they were going to commit $150,000, and they just decided we're going to go ahead and give it. So that is someone in our church who is honoring that commitment. Most of us we are probably taking our commitment and spreading it over weeks and months and things like that. That's incredible. That's still, I want you to see that, but I also want you to know that that's going to make our numbers look a little funky over the next few months, because January has usually, historically, been a down generosity month for us. As a matter of fact, if you take that $150,000 out, we actually came in on a weekly average in January about $21,000. So we're actually behind what we're committing. So I tell you that $150,000 stuff and where we're at to tell you a couple things. One is, it's awesome, it's cool what God's doing. But number two is, I don't want you to feel, or me to feel, all of us, that our commitments that we make to God don't matter. Because if you remember Jesus, when he was in the temple, he called out to his disciples the widow who gave 2 little coins. And he said she gave more than everybody else, because he's talking about sacrifice. That her sacrifice was more than other people. And what I'd say that is our sacrifice, your sacrifice, my sacrifice looks different than everybody else's. Only you and God know that. So I want to encourage us, no matter what, that we are honoring the commitments that we made to God. All right? I just want to challenge us as a church. And so let's all stay on that, have their hands on that together. My next confession is that we aren't as welcoming as a church as you think that we are. We have a reputation as a friendly church. I hear it all the time. At our monthly base camp where new people come in, and I love to ask the question, like, so how did you get here to Discovery, and what's keeping you here at Discovery? And they're like, oh, it's so friendly. Hear that all the time. And we have great leaders who serve on a team called our guest experience team. They're like our frontline people who are helping serve at our doors, at our Start Here desk, as our baristas at our coffee shop. It's a great team. But one thing I hear from people who have been at Discovery for maybe a few weeks or a few months is that that's where the friendliness stops. It's kind of like greeters at a Walmart. Right, you walk into a Walmart, I walk into a Walmart and there's somebody there, he's like, hey, welcome to Walmart, how are you today? I'm like, I'm good, how are you? And before I even hear the answer, I am down an aisle because I don't care. I just want to get in and I want to get out. And that's sometimes how we treat greeters here. It's not a real deep connection. And there's a difference between a friendly church and a welcoming church. And I shared this with our dream team gathering a few Saturdays ago, but I wanted to make sure that everybody heard this. Because the loneliest place that you can be is when you have decided, hey, I like this church. I want to give it, this is where I want to be. And so you start coming and you sit in these rows and you hang out in the lobby, and then you're surrounded by all these groups of people who are in their little circles, their little huddles, and you're left out. And this is where I've heard people come up to me and say, it's not really that welcoming of a church I thought it would be. And so what I want to do is to cast this challenge to every single person who is here and every person who's online, is that you would start seeing yourself as an honorary member of our guest experience team. You may not wear a lanyard, but that here, can I give you a tip? Don't look for first-time guests, because you won't be able to find out and tell who's who, like who's first-time guest, who's not. What you need to look for is somebody who you don't know their first name, and introduce yourself. And last Sunday, I was in the lobby hanging out, and a friend came up to me who was at the Dream Team gathering, who heard me say this exact challenge, and he said, hey, I did it. I found someone last week. I was looking for someone who I didn't know their first name, and I went and introduced myself, and it was a great conversation. I'm so glad you challenged us to do that. So that's one more. I like to call them church discovery ninjas. right? Because you're you're the secret guest experience teams. I want all of us to be ninjas looking out for people who you don't know their first name and introducing yourself. We need to be a welcoming church, Discovery. We need to continue to be that. All right, I get a drink of water for this next one. I love you, church. I confess that I am dreading this election season. A few months ago, I taught on the fact that the metaphor that Jesus used time and time again when he was talking about his followers or us, the metaphor he uses over and over again is sheep. And that he is the good shepherd who loves his flock. But what do? We as sheep, we tend to wander. We try to wander away from the flock, and the good shepherd, he keeps going back and going after those sheep and trying to bring them back in. And in John 10, verse 16, he says, talking about his flock, his followers, they will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. So here's what he's saying. He's telling us that there is one thing that defines his flock. It's not your family background. It's not your heritage. It's not your social status. It's not your ability to influence. It's not about what you know. It's not about how moral of a life that you live. The flock, according to Jesus, are the ones who listen to his voice. And in the original Greek language that the New Testament was written in, the word that Jesus uses is the word akouo. Akouo. I'm pretty sure I drafted him in my fantasy football team this past year. If some of you get that, some of you don't. It's okay. Akouo, which means you first hear and then you heed. You hear it and you heed it. And so Jesus is saying that my sheep are the ones that I know. They're the ones who know me, and they're the ones who akouo, who listen and who heed my voice. In other words, sheep do what he commands. Just as Jesus listens to the Father. In fact, a couple of chapters later in John 14, Jesus says, I love the Father and do exactly what my Father has commanded. If you look at the next two verses, in verses 17 and 18, Jesus tells us he's about to lay down his life. Why? Because it's what the Father commanded him to do. So Jesus makes the choice to align with the Father's command, to heed his voice. And in doing so, what we see is there is this intimacy, there is this oneness between the Father and the Son, and it's the same intimacy, the same oneness that Jesus is inviting us, the flock, into. Just as Jesus and the Father are one, we're called to be one with him. And here's what that means. It means that if you are one with him, and it means if you are one with him, and that you are one with him, and you online are one with him, and I am one with him, then we are all one in him. And in verse 16 again, it says, they will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. And Jesus emphasizes that there is one flock. This is the shepherd's way. In fact, Jesus didn't just call us to be one, he prayed for it. Did you realize that in John 17? Just before he goes to the cross, the same night he is arrested, he prays, he says, I am praying not only for these disciples, talking about the disciples that Jesus can physically see, right? The ones who were following him in that day. He says, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message. In other words, he's praying for us. That he's praying for us, and here's what he prays. He says, I pray that they will all be one, just as you, Father, and I are one. As you are in me, Father, I am in you. And may they be in us. And here's the reason. So that the world will believe that you sent me. Jesus goes on to say, may they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. In other words, our unity as a church, as a family of believers, our unity is part of our testimony. Can you see how divided the world is today? When I even told you how I am dreading this election season, you all kind of laughed, and I had someone last service who just groaned. Like you heard it like, oh, it is this year, right? You know, just how divided the world is, and yet I think the world should look at the church, followers of Jesus, and go, they are so united. How do they do it? It should be a part of our testimony. It testifies to the fact that Jesus was indeed sent by God. It testifies to the love that God has for us. But not only is it part of our testimony, our unity is also part of our security. I mean, we know that there is an enemy who wants nothing more than to attack and to scatter the flock. And the enemy knows that if he can separate me from the flock, and if he can separate you from the flock, then we become easy prey. Because when you're separated from the flock, listen, it means that you're separated from the shepherd. And so what does he do? He uses deception as a tool for division. He uses discord to promote disunity. And then he will lie to us, and he will tell us that when we disagree with one another, that we should just disassociate. That we should just leave, walk away, and that's not the right way. It's the easy way, but it's not the right way. And the shepherd's way is not always easy. I would in fact say it's rarely easy, but it's always for our good. Now, it doesn't mean that every member of the flock is going to agree on every issue all the time, and that's okay. Because there is a difference between disagreement and disunity. In fact, as we're talking about, I'm going to give you a few definitions here real quick. Disagreement is a difference of opinion or perspective. It's natural. In fact, not only is disagreement natural, I would say it could actually be healthy. It could be a healthy thing because disagreements are one way that iron sharpens iron, as Proverbs 27 writes. When disagreement, when it's navigated in a healthy way, it actually can bring us into a conversation with each other. And it leads to personal reflection and causes us to consider, hey, where might my thinking, my perspective on this, maybe it's a little skewed. Maybe it's a little blurry in this area. And in fact, I would just suggest that within the body of Christ, the church family, the goal should never be to try to eliminate all disagreement. That's okay for us as a church, but here's the difference. Disunity is a fundamental or foundational divide, meaning that there is a schism which will permanently separate and isolate. The reason that it's permanent separation is because you cannot build on two different foundations. In fact, we see the tension of this as we continue reading in John 10, verse 19. It says, when Jesus had said these things, the people were again divided, in their opinions about him. This is the third time that the Apostle John writes that the people who were following Jesus were divided. Third time. And so what's happened here, some of the people, they saw the miracles that Jesus performed. They heard his teachings, and they said they put their belief in him. And others saw the same miracles, they heard the same teachings, and they said that Jesus was possessed by a demon. I mean, talk about two completely different responses. One says, this is of God, and the other response is, this is satanic. Talk about two polar opposite responses. But when it comes to Jesus, we even see this in our culture today, but that Jesus doesn't offer us a different opinion. Jesus offers us a totally different foundation. And so what we are to make of all this? As believers, as the church, when we talk about the shepherd's way, what does that mean for us who are choosing to follow his voice? Here's kind of the bottom line for us today. Being one with the shepherd is being one with the flock. Being one with the shepherd means being one with the flock. Because the invitation of the shepherd is to follow him as one. And since that is the invitation, Discovery, it should not surprise us that the enemy will do everything he can to sabotage. So we fight for unity, but the enemy comes along, and as we try to fight against him, what he wants us to do is to turn 90 degrees and to start fighting with each other. And it's happened all the way through church history in so many different realms. But today, in the last several years, it's been through politics. And I've seen it happen. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an opinion. And I'm not saying you shouldn't engage in politics. But as Jesus' flock, the body of Christ, I want you to know it existed long before the Republican Party. It existed long before the Democratic Party. And it lasted long before the Independent Party. The prerequisite for Jesus' flock is not your political party. It's whether or not, according to Jesus, whether or not you follow his voice. So regardless of your political persuasion, we can still, as a church, stand in unity, regardless of where you stand politically, and say, hey, we believe that there is a ruler who is above all other rulers, and it is King Jesus, and that is the thing that we are going to unite as a church body on, all right? And so we must follow Jesus as one. Again, that doesn't mean that we're going to agree about everything all the time, and that's okay, because as long as we are on the foundation of Christ, when he is the foundation, there is room for disagreement. But hear me on this, on the foundation of Christ, there is no room for disunity. And when you allow disagreement to become a reason for disunity within the body of Christ, here's what it means. It means that you have elevated your opinion, you have elevated your perspective to the same level of authority as Jesus, which is idolatry. And that's exactly what the Pharisees did in the Bible. So being one with the Good Shepherd means being one with the flock. I have one last confession for us today, and it's going to lead us into our time of taking of the Lord's Supper, of communion, the Eucharist. So I'm going to ask our team to go ahead and to go back to the trays to prepare for communion. And it's this confession here. I confess to you that I still believe in the local church. I still believe in Discovery. As part of this series, I've expressed to you some of my disappointments and some of my struggles and just frustrations even with where the church is, not just Discovery, but church as a whole. And I've expressed to you some of my very good friends who've been pastors for decades over the last 2-3 years were part of the number of pastors who said, I'm done. I'm just quit. I've taken my calling from God and I'm putting it aside because I'm just going to go do something else because I'm tired of all the frustrations. But I confess to you today that I still believe in the church. I believe the church is the hope of the world as Jesus started the church to be, as God's idea to help his kingdom come to this earth in a broken world. I'm in. I love this church so much, and I've served at other churches in other parts of the country, and there's always been a part of me, whenever I've served other places, where I'm kind of like, what would it be like if we did something over there? What wish God would lead us to? I absolutely love where God has planted us here at Discovery. Love our church. And there's things that frustrate, and there's things that aren't right, and there's things that I know where God wants to get to, and he'll get us to in his right time. But I love you. And I think back to the words of the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 1. And I think these echo exactly my heart to you. He says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership with the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this, that God who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. I love that partnership in the gospel. I know some churches you may have been a part of before, they talk about, are you a church? What's the word they use? Church member? We don't use that membership word a lot around here because, I'm a member of a lot of things. I look on my phone and I'm a member of like Starbucks, and I'm a member of this restaurant and this hotel chain and but it's really about what's in it for me. I'm a member. I've given you my email address because I get this and I want this. But when you're part of a church family, it's a partnership in the gospel. That's the word I like. Partner means that we're all in this together, partnering with what God is doing in our community and in the world. So my challenge to us is, where are you partnering with us? Where is your part to play in helping God do what he wants to do through this church? Unified. We're going to do communion a little different today, because usually when you get the bread and the cup, we kind of let you kind of take it and be kind of quiet and take it to on your own time. Today we're going to take it in unison. I'm going to lead you in our communion time where we take the bread and the juice together as a symbol of our unity with the shepherd. When we are one with the shepherd, we are one with the flock. So would you go ahead and pass the trays and pass the double cups to everybody. If you don't want to take communion, if that's something you're not quite ready for, just let it pass by. There's no one's going to care or notice or anything like that.